Hi, my name is Courtney Lavelle, and I'm a young person in long-term recovery. For me, that means that today I get to be a wonderful mother to my beautiful little girl and get to be a supportive wife, an example to my peers. And at 25 years old, I have a lifetime of possibilities to look forward to.
Courtney, welcome to the show.
Thanks,
First
Dean.
things first, I want to thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule. I know you just got back from a national conference, which we'll talk about more later. But in particular, for taking time out, come on the show to share your experience, strength, and hope. Not only that recovery is possible, but anything is possible with recovery. So let's start out with growing up. For me, I grew up in a small town. I was an altar boy. I played in band. I played sports. My parents were together. My parents are still together to this day. I was a volunteer fireman. I came from a typical household, but yet I found myself in the grips of a 15-year active addiction. Tell me about how it was for Courtney growing up.
Sure. Well, thank you, Dean, for having me here today. I'm excited about this. For me, growing up, I grew up in suburban upstate New York. My stepfather and my mother raised me. My stepfather worked on a farm. My mother worked at a convenience store. They were kind of the working poor. We were a disadvantaged family before that term really existed. But we grew up in a really nice town. I can think of my neighbors used to go fox hunting on the weekends for fun. And my life consisted of spaghetti dinners, and we would raise our own cattle to slaughter for meat. So we didn't really have a lot of resources as a child, but I spent a great deal of my time kind of creating my own fun because of that and being outdoors. I was a very active child. My parents were really supportive, but they weren't really around much in my early years because they were working so much. They worked really long hours. I used to have to go over to my neighbor's house to get on the bus in the morning to go to school because my parents would already be at work. So from a really early age, I started to establish a sense of independence. I remember in particular getting on the bus at my neighbor's house, and her mother used to check my lunch bag because she felt I didn't have enough food in my lunch bag. And she would rush to stuff more food into my lunch bag. And this woman couldn't have had better intentions.
Yeah.
She just wanted to help the girl next door. But I internalized that as like shame and guilt and disappointment because my mother was my hero growing up, and I didn't want there to be any physical proof that we were struggling or that my mother wasn't as perfect as I put her on the pedestal to be, and that we needed some extra help. So I used to, instead of being filled with gratitude for this woman's efforts to help me, I would be shameful. And I remember being 7 or 8 years old and just feeling like I was inadequate and I wasn't good enough. And those feelings would stick with me throughout my childhood, into my adolescence and my teenage years.
How was school?
School was good. I was really shy. I was really shy when I was younger. I had some trauma in my home life. My sister had undiagnosed and untreated mental health disorders, and there was a lot of sibling abuse growing up. So school was kind of my reprieve from my home life, being that my parents weren't home very much. My sister was my caretaker for most of my childhood, and it was really rough growing up in that kind of environment. So when I'd go to school, that was my safety in a sense. But I had all this anxiety and this trauma that was never addressed. So I clammed up in school, and I developed social anxiety, and it got worse as I got older. That coupled with that shame I felt from being, the poor family in a privileged town. By the time I was in middle school, I had really significant anxiety that was never treated or addressed. Not for any particular reason other than my family didn't really know any better to talk about these issues or to get help for them. So by the time I was going into high school, I really decided that I wanted to be a different person. I didn't want to be that shameful person. I didn't want to be shy anymore, and I wanted to really fit in because social acceptance to me at that time seemed like the answer for all of my problems. I was shy, I didn't have that many friends, but if I could become popular, then all of my problems would go away.
So does that bring us to the first time you used?
Not quite.
Okay.
Before I started, being active in my addiction, and it manifested in other ways. I had an eating disorder. By the time I was 13, I had a very serious suicide attempt. And I didn't get treatment for any of this because I hid it. I hid it all. I didn't want anybody to know that there was anything wrong with me. So I started to create this facade, this mask, that everything was fine with me, that everything was perfect. I lived in a perfect family. My home life was great. There was nothing wrong, but internally I was struggling greatly. I had depression and anxiety and low self-esteem, and I wasn't doing anything about it but covering it up, and I started to get really good at covering it up. So going into high school, I had all this underlying stuff happening that I wasn't addressing. And the perfect way to really hide that was to start doing really good in school. I was in honors classes. I started playing varsity sports. I did cheerleading, ran track, played tennis. I wanted to be that perfect girl.
I ran track too. That could possibly be a precursor to addiction.
Maybe we're onto something. So I spent a lot of my time just painting this image of who I thought that I should be, and never really understanding who I really was underneath it all, and getting the help that I needed. And everybody bought into it. Nobody knew. Nobody stopped to ask that polite girl if there was anything wrong, because I did really well to cover it up.
Sure. So when was the first time you used?
I think I was 15, the first time I had alcohol. And it was snuck from someone's parents' liquor cabinet. And the first time I drank alcohol, I blacked out.
Wow. Right off the bat.
Yeah. I grew up, my parents, they did really well to instill good values in us, like work hard, play hard, be a good person. But we never really had conversations about when you do start to experiment, what are safe ways to do it and what are really dangerous things to do. So I had no idea how to drink. I just wanted to drink more.
Those are those taboo conversations for a lot of families of young people nowadays.
Right. And we didn't really have them. So when I drank a lot, and I thought it was another way for me to be that cool, popular person if I could drink the guys under the table, and that's what I tried to do. So I would drink until I blacked out, my very first time. I don't remember much of it.
Wow.
And it started off as just a weekend thing. In 9th grade, I'd go over to friends' houses. We would take liquor from the parents' liquor cabinets, and we would drink until we passed out or did really stupid things, and it was fun. We had a good time, and then we'd go to school and maintain our honors classes, play our varsity sports.
Not unlike what a lot of kids do.
Right. And there were so many of us doing it. But for me, it progressed beyond that. It didn't remain just fun weekend partying for very long.
How long did it take for it to start to progress?
Within that same school year.
Wow.
Not long after that, I experimented with marijuana. And when I started smoking weed, it was like all my problems were solved.
What grade is this?
9th grade. 9th grade, and then in the summer before my sophomore year. In that year, everything progressed. As soon as I started smoking weed, I started smoking every single day, all day long. It was that wave, that tidal wave of pain that I'd been carrying around was alleviated momentarily when I was smoking. Yeah. So now that for the first time in my life, I found something that made that pain kind of subside, and this alter ego that I was really carrying with me kind of disappeared momentarily. So I loved it, and I wanted to do it all the time because I would feel confident and I wouldn't have to be so scared all the time. And I found a peer group of people who like to smoke weed all the time, every day.
So every day smoking weed in the 10th grade?
Yeah, oh yeah, yep. Not even prior to that, the summer before I even made it into 10th grade. I didn't make it very far into 10th grade. Again, probably that summer between 9th grade and 10th grade, I went from smoking weed every day to hanging out with a new group of peers who weren't worried about honors classes or varsity sports, but would rather skip class to go smoke behind the dumpster. They became my best friends because we had something we all could identify with. It wasn't something necessarily superficial. We all were self-medicating for something, and that bond was something I hadn't experienced yet in my life. And that summer, I started experimenting with everything. I started sniffing Adderall. I did mushrooms. I was partying all the time. I started to become known to be the party girl. I I'd gotten my first job somewhere in this haze and was able to save up enough money to buy a car. So I had a car, I had a license.
Now you're mobile.
Now I'm mobile, and everyone knew it too. So I was that person drinking and partying and driving carloads of kids around in the middle of the night. I could have died or killed myself and so many other people so many times, and I had no idea.
Yeah.
I had no idea that it was wrong, that it was bad. My mind wasn't working like that. I knew I felt better when I did this.
So how bad did it get?
I dropped out of school before I even started going into harder drugs, from the alcohol, the marijuana, the other miscellaneous things that I'd experiment with in 10th grade. Before the end of that first year, before December, I had dropped out of school. And, you know, thankfully my parents, my mother made me go and get my GED immediately. So I did that, thank God. But then I was without any responsibilities. I still kept a job. I didn't need school anymore. I had found all that I needed in life through drugs. That's all I wanted to do. I found myself in a very unhealthy relationship. My life was complete, and I had no long-term vision.
What more could you ask for as an addict?
Right. I was in bliss, you know?
Life is
Relationship,
good.
drugs, money, car. I thought I was in paradise, and that's all I cared about. And then I was still hanging out with friends that were still going to school. I would pick them up from school and help them skip class. We would go party. I wasn't long into this, my sophomore year, right in this time. I'm 16 years old, and I was introduced to prescription medications. So the very first prescription medicine I used was actually Suboxone. I had no idea what it was. I'd actually grown up pretty anti-drug. I swore I would never do anything other than, you know, what I'd already done, which wasn't a very short list.
Yeah.
But I would never do things like cocaine
or
pills or heroin. I would never do it. But the person who introduced me to Suboxone explained that it was a prescription drug. People take it all the time. It's safe. The doctors give it out. Yeah, it's supposed to help people. We were just going to crush it up and sniff it so that we would feel it more. So I tried it, and I got so sick. I was so violently ill. But after that nausea wore off, it was the best feeling I'd ever felt. All of my pain, my shame, my insecurity, everything just disappeared. I was numb. And I was hooked immediately. Immediately. I didn't seek it out, but from that point moving forward, every time I was at a party or with people using, which was every day in this period of my life, every day, and it was around, I would use it. And before long, that occasional use started to progress, and suddenly I was starting to buy it for myself, and I was, you know, doing any kind of painkiller, prescription painkiller. Would crush them up and sniff them. And
so did your use stop at Suboxone and prescription painkillers?
no, not at all. I think I used that for maybe a couple months. With everything I did it to the max. My progression, thankfully, in the end, was very fast. And within months, I was using heroin, just sniffing it at first. And so by the time I'm 17, I'm using heroin every day, all day long, completely dependent on it. Dropped out of school.
So it was a real fast progression for you.
Yeah, very. Dropped out of school. I couldn't hold a job. I'd stopped really caring about a job. I started stealing from my parents to support my habit. They knew I was experimenting with some medicine, like some drugs, but they didn't know that. And right at this time, my mother was diagnosed with cancer. So it was just a perfect storm. Right as I turned 17, and I just started trying heroin for the first time, and then she was diagnosed with cancer. And I just used that to fuel my self-destructive behaviors. And I didn't want to feel, I was not sober from that point until I got clean.
So Courtney, what would you say the concept of your bottom was, or some of the dark places my addiction took me?
Yeah.
What can you identify as, you know, the bottoms and really to the point of desperation for you just prior to the decision you made to get help?
I never made that decision.
Somebody made it for you?
Yeah.
Prior to someone making that decision for you,
Yeah.
how did you come about that? point in your life.
Right. So my progression was so bad. I ended up going out on the run, and I was living within a gang in an inner city, and I was stealing to support my habit. So bad that law enforcement was looking for me.
So just let me backtrack. So the girl next door,
Yeah.
whose neighbor was making sure had enough food in her backpack,
Yeah.
cheerleader,
Yeah.
sports, ran track, finds herself living with a gang.
Yeah. Yep. I was always a nice person. I was never cruel.
Doesn't make you a bad girl. I can understand where you're coming from.
Yeah. So I made friends with the drug dealers.
Yeah.
And my use progressed to the point where I couldn't stay at home. I wouldn't go to treatment. My parents tried a couple times, and I would sign myself out. I was put on Suboxone at one point and was just selling my script. I didn't want to get better. I never wanted to be better.
So what happened?
I eventually was arrested.
Okay.
Law enforcement tracked me down and called the gang that I was staying with and told them that they were coming to get me. And of course, I couldn't no longer stay there. So I left that night, which was February 7th, 2008. And at this point, I was using intravenous heroin and cocaine. And I tried to kill myself that night. Everything that I had, I used. I pulled off into a development, parked my car, and finished the rest of my drugs and didn't think I'd ever wake back up. But I did, thankfully. February 9th, this is now, of 2008. I woke up freezing cold, no money, no cigarettes, no drugs, and I wasn't dead, so I was gonna go home. And I went home, 5 o'clock in the morning. My parents woke me up at like 9 and said that the state troopers were coming to get me, and I went off to jail. And that's how I got clean.
So getting help was getting arrested for you.
Yeah.
Tell me how it was getting help into now. How's recovery and since you've been sober?
Yeah. So sometime in my time incarcerated, I had that moment that we talk about a lot in recovery, whether it was a spiritual awakening, an epiphany, or just my neurons finally starting to fire again.
Sure. The fog is lifted.
Right. And my poor mother was coming to see me in jail as the chemo was wearing away at her until she could no longer come see me. And it was in that time, I was 19.
Wow.
And incarcerated and facing a lot of charges, a lot of really serious charges. And I had that moment that I don't want to do this and I don't need to do this. I don't need to go back up there and start using. So I started having meetings, self-help meetings with the county jail. I had an attorney who was able to get me treatment court. And when I was finally released from incarceration, I went immediately into a halfway house. And that started the next 2 years of treatment for me, 2 consecutive years between mainly inpatient. I went to a therapeutic community and then outpatient, and lots of counseling and support, the help that I never got growing up.
The help that you never got when you were a kid.
Yeah.
So how's it been since you've been sober? Because I know you're involved in all kinds of things.
Yeah.
Getting the word out in the community about young people in recovery. So since you've been sober, tell me about it.
Life has been amazing. Just when I think life can't get any better, it just keeps getting better.
Yeah.
It's been about 6.5 years now since that night when I tried to end my life. And everything that I've ever wanted or thought that I could want in life, I've been able to achieve because of really good treatment, really connecting with my peers and developing a strong support network. I got married. I have an incredible husband who's very supportive. I had a little girl who's now 3. Just recently we were
Who's never seen you high.
No. And Lord, I hope she never will, God willing. But just recently we were able to buy our first house.
Wow.
I'm very involved in my community today. I know what I was blessed with is not something that everybody is blessed with, and I want to try to help as many people as I can to walk the path that I'm able to walk today, because it's possible. It's possible not only to be sober and to find recovery, but to be happy.
At 25 years old.
Yeah.
So tell me a little bit about how it is being a young person in long-term recovery and the efforts that you've made and the collaborations you've made to get the word out that you can be sober and stay sober at 25 years. You can get sober and stay sober at 19 years old.
19, yeah.
19.
Yeah, at 19, it was intimidating. Coming up on my 21st birthday in recovery.
Yeah, how was that?
It was not as big a deal as
Just
people
another
make
day.
it out to be. You know, at that point, it was a couple years sober. I surrounded myself with other sober, motivated, happy people. It's a lifestyle change, recovery. You know, once you make that commitment to be sober and to keep good people in your life and to take care of yourself, it just becomes you. So the fact that I'm a 25-year young person in recovery is no different, I think, than being an older person in recovery. It's about the life that I choose to live, and the life that I choose to live today is one that's conducive to my sobriety. And I have a national network of peers today through Young People in Recovery who are on the same journey as me. I'm not alone in this. There's so many of us.
I know recently you've traveled. Every time I see you on Facebook, it seems like you're in an airport.
It feels that way
You've been in
sometimes.
Washington. You just came back from Colorado. So tell me more about Young People in Recovery, YPR.
So Young People in Recovery is a national grassroots advocacy organization that's target is to help young people in or seeking recovery to find better housing situations, go back to school, help them with employment. We advocate for better policies for young people, and there's a national team who kind of coaches us and directs us of young people in recovery themselves, and we have chapters across the country. I'm the chapter lead of the New York chapter, and we meet monthly. We are a group of peers, some of us in recovery, some of us not, some of us younger than others. There is no criteria for who can be a part of Young People in Recovery. But we have leads who focus on specific things, and we meet monthly. We have community meetings. We talk about the needs that are in our specific area and what we can do to help. And moving forward, we're going to be implementing these workshops to help other young people with housing, education, and employment. And it's great. I get to, because of Young People in Recovery, I've had so many incredible opportunities. I partner with SAMHSA often today because SAMHSA is really working hard at bringing the youth's recovering voice to the table. So they approach young people in recovery, and we get many opportunities to speak and attend conferences and to develop our professional skills. I get to travel all the time.
Yeah.
Something I've always wanted to do and never actually thought I could do. I do it all the time now. And it's all for such a positive cause to really nurture the young person in recovery today and bring our voice out so that we're not hidden in the shadows any longer. There are 23 million people in recovery. There are so many of us, and 90% of addiction starts between the ages of 12 and 20. So we're all young people in this journey. We're all there. We've all started there. And let's work to try to stop the addiction from progressing for so many years. We can catch this early, and we can live our whole lives in recovery.
And break down the stigma that's attached to addiction and recovery, because if I passed you on the street, the last thing I would think of is, a heroin addict that was living with a gang that dropped out of school.
Yeah.
And I think that's such a barrier for people to seek out and receive treatment. And then also the stigma that's attached to all the people that don't have that firsthand experience of a loved one or themselves being an addict, which holds us back.
Right. Well, so many of us addicts, we're lost. We're lost, and we cling on to our identity of being a drug addict or an alcoholic as a security blanket. It's the only identity that most of us have known. So to start to learn that we can have a new identity, that we can be this person, and then really embrace that new role, that young person in long-term recovery, is so empowering. And people need to know that that's possible.
What's been the hardest part for you in recovery? Has your sobriety in recovery ever been challenged?
Sure. I think immediately what comes to mind is the loss of my mother. I was not even 20 years old. I was 19. I was 9 months clean when my mother passed away. And I got to be there and hold her hand as she passed away. And I got to make amends to her. I got to show her that I could be healthy and sober and live a good life. But that was a very trying experience to be a 19-year-old child saying goodbye to your hero. But it was because of my recovery and my support network that I got through that. You know, and you know, life happens in life's terms, and just because you're sober doesn't mean that stops. But we learn to deal with it differently in recovery. And I'm grateful for my challenges today because I know that those challenges helped make me a stronger person. And everything that I can overcome in sobriety just adds to my toolbox of things that I can move forward for the rest of my life with.
What's something important that you think our viewers and people generally need to know about addiction and recovery that they may not necessarily know, or there may be myths attached to addiction and recovery? And I want to give you the opportunity to kind of
I think
challenge some of the thoughts that...
Well, addiction happens to
public has.
anyone.
Yeah.
Like you said, you probably wouldn't look at me and picture me as a drug addict. And through most of my use, that's how I got away with it, because I wasn't that person that people think of when you think of a heroin addict.
A brown paper bag on the back of a bus, or somebody in an abandoned building.
Even when I was homeless and living within a gang and stealing to support my habit, I was never that person. And I think that's an important message, that it's not about an image, it's not about looks, it's about people who are suffering. And that can be anyone. Addiction is a really easy way to self-medicate problems. And people of all walks of life do it. And people of all walks of life get clean and sober and change the world because of their recovery. So not to assume any images or labels for addiction. I think that's something that we're working on changing.
What would be your message to one of our viewers, or to someone that knows, it could be a loved one, a brother, sister, a father, mother, coworker, that's still suffering with the disease of addiction? What would be your message? That's your camera.
I would tell them that you're not alone. Whether you're somebody struggling with addiction yourself, or you know somebody who's struggling with addiction, you're not alone in this journey, and that there's support out there, there's help out there, and there's lots and lots of hope.
Courtney, thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.